book, they really talk about like the
Audible
crazy.
isn't reading.
It isn't reading.
I
but
want to fight. I'm gonna
It's
challenge
not
that.
Is this a good-
reading.
And
You're
here's-
listening to a podcast in a book form.
Yeah, but you haven't. The
You've
newer
absorbed-
books that come out, they make them with Audible in mind. They make them with the audiobook in mind. So they have like the original authors reading it, and they make it so you don't have to.
But that's not reading a book. That's not.
But you're
reading
still
a
retaining
book.
the same information.
Coop, I
that you
will
would
agree.
Get.
But it's not
It's-
reading.
it's-
You're
it's about
listening
the
to a
absorbing-
book.
But what does that
You're
make?
listening
But
to a
if you're
story.
retaining the same amount of information,
But that's what a podcast is.
but a podcast doesn't give as much information. I don't think.
Our kind of podcast don't, but there are podcasts that
No,
are
there are.
information
There are.
based.
But I'm saying
so
you'll
it's a
still-
podcast. It's not a book.
But
Reading
if it's
a
one
book is
person,
taking a book
if it's
and
one
reading
person narrating it.
it doesn't. The narrate. What? Forrest Gump has a goddamn narrator. It's not a book.
So if I listen to Forrest Gump, I'm not going to get as much from the
it's
from the
a
book.
movie.
Well, all right, then let's
All
pick a 1984 or something like that.
Yeah, if you watch the movie, it's
Well,
not like
I
I'm
didn't
reading
I
the
didn't even know
book.
they had. I'm talking about the book. What book did they not make a movie of that we know?
A lot of books have movies.
Oh well, All Quiet on the Western Front is coming out.
All right, before that comes out, would you get? I feel like you'd get the same, unless it has graphs and maps and shit. You're getting the same shit from listening to it.
Okay.
You're arguing two different things with me. You're saying the
What am I
knowledge
saying?
thing.
I'm saying
it's
if you read a
not
book to get
reading
knowledge.
It's
but
not reading a
not
book.
reading a
Coop, would-
book.
Okay.
No, he's arguing against me. He's saying no, it's like reading a book.
Yeah,
because
but if you say
Okay,
I-
wait. Let's
listen,
clarify
you're
our
just
arguments.
like-
Clarify our arguments.
All right.
I'm saying it's a podcast because Joey's like, well,
Okay, well, I'm not
podcast-
saying
Oh, this
it's
is
not
gonna be a good
podcast.
argument. I like
I'm
this.
saying if you
It's a stupid
listened,
argument.
if you read 1984 and I listened to 1984, we had the same exact
But it's
experience at the end of the
not
day.
Reading it.
Not the same. I would
Reading
not
it
say the
is
same
different.
experience.
Reading it is completely different. You can get the same knowledge, and you might take the same perspective from it. But
Yeah,
it's but
that's the whole point of a book.
But it's not reading a book.
You're not reading words.
Reading is different than listening. That's exactly
Right, but
You
in
can't
terms of
read-
books,
you can't read
but
sounds,
one's not
bro.
better than the other, unless you have charts and
It's
graphs
like,
and they
dude,
use
it's
like a
like
textbook.
reading music and playing music or listening to it.
No,
It's
I
two
don't think
different
that at all.
experiences. Reading music and
Playing music, you're actually doing something.
Okay, ready?
Okay, reading music and listening to music and arguing that you're having the same experience. That's what you're saying. It's not. Because when you
That's
read,
complete-
you have your own you're narrating it yourself. You're saying
Which
you
most of the
retain
time is
knowledge.
probably wrong.
Hey,
But
hey.
it doesn't matter. It's
Hey.
you reading the. That's why it's different. That's why it's different. You're
But
listening to the
but
book.
if you're getting more information from listening to it,
Who gives a fuck about more information? You're
because
not
that's the
getting-
whole point of reading a book. What are you going to read a book for?
I'm going to
I get
Joey
what
on
the
the
point of
info.
What's the
reading
whole point of reading a book if you're not good? If you're just sitting there looking
I
at
think you're
words?
Fucking, I think, dude,
Coop.
this is like
The point of a book
wish
is to
I
get
could-
the
no,
information.
I wish I could punch the words into my ears, Joey. I'm not talking about retention of information at all.
But you're
if you're saying I
you're
read
saying
a
it's
book,
like listen to
you
a podcast.
need to tell me. You need to tell me that if you listen to the audiobook of 1984,
Okay.
you listened to the audiobook of 1984.
Yes.
You did not read 1984. That's my whole argument.
But
You're
I'm saying reading, you still got through the whole thing.
I listened to the audiobook of Assassination of Julius Caesar. I highly recommend it. Are you happy, Coop?
Yes, but that's my
and you
point.
have
You're
the
not
same.
reading a book.
You're at the same level as someone that read
I
it.
have the book that I
You're-
talked about
yes,
earlier.
the action
And I
of
have
reading.
the physical thing. That's what reading is. Even if you have
Okay,
even if you have a
okay,
Kindle, that's
okay.
reading because you're reading the words yourself.
Yes.
Listening isn't reading. That's my whole argument. And you've been
Okay.
like that. So you're basically.
But I'm saying, but you're
audiobooks are
acting
a
like it's not
Audiobooks
reading
are a
it.
podcast.
You're acting
That's
like
all
you're
they
not
are.
getting anything out of it. You said it's like a
You're
podcast.
not reading- Are you reading our podcast right
I
now?
listened to
listeners?
what I said.
No,
I
no.
already
Here's the
said
deal.
that. Did I
People
not say
need
it,
to text
Prokop?
me because I know people
Did I
listen
not
to this
say
far.
it, Prokop?
Well,
I
the
said you're not physically reading it, but you're getting the same thing out of it.
Stop saying it's reading then. You just
not
started getting
physically
this.
reading.
It's all right.
So, well, then it is not reading.
You tell
but
us, listeners.
Here's what I do. Sometimes I get a text and I play the audiobook, and it helps me absorb it in two different ways.
Mhm.
I am so ADD brain that I'll stop absorbing the words. So I'm just looking at
so
words. And like same when Coop brought up music, it's very similar to that. When I look at notes,
reading a book's
if I
impressive,
can
and listening to a
comprehend the
podcast
music,
isn't.
I can make
It
it
is
up
still
in
impressive.
my head. But if I'm not that good at sight reading, I can't like be like, oh, this note is going to sound like this if I were to play it. I'm not that quick with sight reading.
Fucking whole legs showing.
But I can like hear a note and go and repeat it really quickly. I can be
So-
sing a note.
So
Joey.
what if we change the
Sing it.
word from reading
Listen
to
to fucking
consume?
music.
To consume.
Consume
I
it?
consumed 1984.
No, you listened to the audio book.
But I consumed it. I consumed it.
My
Absorbed
argument
it.
is you need to specify. I'm looking into the camera. This is a PSA.
Because he's judging.
This is a
He's
PSA.
judging.
If you come up to me and say, "I've read this book," like I'm reading this 600-page book about the.
Okay.
If you come up to me and go, "I read that too," and you
Just because
listen
it's
to
hard
the
for you to
audio
read
book,
doesn't mean
it's not that it's
just
hard
'cause
for
you
me to
can't read.
I read fine, but I'm
Just-
saying it's not the same thing.
But it takes the same amount of time.
no, it doesn't. I honestly.
What are you talking about?
He's
I've read
reading
and
it-
listened to books, and it takes the
Maybe.
same amount of time.
Maybe I don't know. I think it's
Especially when you have the author go, next chapter, this. Like, that's just adding time for the audiobook. So honestly, it might take longer.
there's no way it takes. Long.
Unless you're looking at a textbook and graph, and then I agree with you. Because if you see the graphs and shit.
You're fucking delusional. It's because you listen to books and you
I
definitely
listen
haven't read
and
in
I
years.
have
You haven't
say
read a
more.
book in years.
I've
dude,
read.
that's
I'm
all.
reading 3 books right now at once. I've read
Dude,
all of Andy
listening to
Weir's books.
You're reading the audio books.
I've listened to 10 audiobooks and I've read 7 books this
So
year.
you've listened to
Damn.
10 podcasts.
Read on my Kindle.
I would argue that listening to a Dan Carlin podcast is the same as him reading a history book.
Well, he has history books that he reads.
I would say
That's
that's more
what
of a
I'm
lecture.
saying, though.
That's more like a
But
lecture,
why does
But
though.
that
that's
make
not
any
you
less?
reading it.
But why does
That's
that
you
make it
listening to a
any less?
podcast because it's a podcast.
But you're making it
You're
out like it's
fucking-
less.
it's
Why are you making
infuriating.
it out like it's less?
We need to call Aaron and get him in.
Aaron hasn't read
Aaron.
or listened to a book.
Stop
in-
jacking off.
Stop whacking it.
1 sec. We'll get him in.
I don't think Aaron knows what a book is. But what are you gonna ask him?
I'm gonna,
Okay.
I'm gonna fucking lay down.
All right, can I come in here with my little mediation?
Yeah.
Yes. So, Coop, do you think you are absorbing any less
You
information?
guys keep bringing this absorbing information
No,
shit
no, no.
in.
I'm
well,
not.
that's the whole point.
Hello?
Hey. I need you to settle. We're on the podcast right now. I need you to settle an argument. All right?
Yeah.
Joey is arguing listening to an audiobook is the same as reading the book itself. And I am arguing that listening to an audiobook is the same as listening to a podcast. And these two idiots keep on bringing in knowledge retention. I'm not talking about it. I'm talking about technicalities. It is completely different. than
But we
reading.
already gave up
Okay,
the technicality.
we gave up the
Wait, they're
technical.
saying listening to a podcast is different than...
No, they're saying
Thank you,
listening
Aaron.
to
Thank you,
essentially,
Aaron.
and they're
Thank you,
essentially
Aaron.
saying listening to a podcast is the same as reading a book.
You're saying that.
That's what an audiobook is. It's a fucking
No,
podcast.
it's not.
Yes, it is. It's
It's-
a one-man podcast.
No,
it's
most-
like
It's like 8
one-man
hours.
narrative.
Most
It's a
podcasts is
one-man
filler. Most-
Joey, it depends. Joey's listened to hardcore history, and that is him. That is a book. Or,
But you're listening to it is my point. That's not reading.
Yeah.
yeah, that's not reading.
Yes, there we go.
No, you changed the
No,
question
that's
again.
been the whole
He has no argument.
That's been the whole
He has no
argument.
argument
I've been
because he
saying
can't
the whole
read.
time.
Me and
He
Joey
can't
are on the
read, so he
knowledge
finds it a
retention.
challenge.
Joey keeps on bringing up knowledge retention, dude. Like
Yes.
a fucking jabroni.
Why
I'm not
would that
talking
not bring
about
up- that's
that.
the whole point of reading a
I'm
book.
saying it's still impressive you are getting the same knowledge. I'm not arguing that you
Okay,
couldn't be
well,
on the
then
same.
there you
I
go.
can admit it's a little
arguing you can't
lazier.
be on the same. I'm not saying you can't be
Do
on
you
the
want
same, the same conversation. Like if you if you listen to the audiobook of 1984 and I fucking read it, we can have a conversation and a dialogue. But you didn't read it; you listened to it.
Yes, but we are
That's
at the
my
same
point.
end point. The same
Aaron,
end
don't
point.
you agree? He hung up.
Yeah,
This kid's a
because he's
fucking
on my
idiot.
side. Because
No,
I know
he's not.
him.
He's not.
Because we already
Dude,
had this conversation. I know he is.
No, dude. It's
Dude.
stupid. It's not the same. It's the same with knowledge.
Why would
I
I
would
not-
argue that, but that's the thing. You're trying to argue, but you're just getting in the technicality of it with me now. We're going back
You're
and
the
forth.
one with the technicality.
No, you're bringing the technicalities in because I'm saying
already,
it's in the dialogue.
agreed. I agreed to change it to consume a book.
Yes,
that
but you
includes
need to
audiobook
argue-
and reading. Is
Reading
consuming
is
a
so
book.
different, and I think
I
that
don't
that's
think
fucking
it is.
crazy. That's fucking crazy.
And let
It
me
depends on the book,
Let me
I'd
land
say.
in the middle a little bit
I'll
because
go with that word.
I'm reading this book, or I'm listening. Excuse me, Coop. Excuse me. So sorry. I'm listening to this
there
book.
you go. Exactly. You're right.
So
I'm
but-
listening to this book in like, okay, am I gonna like this? It's the Audible once a month thing. I already pay for it. Let me try it out. If I don't like it, whatever.
They give you 1 credit a month too. That's 1 book a month.
Yeah. So I like it. Now I know.
Thank
I'm
you,
gonna get
Bezos.
it.
Give us money,
And then
Bezos.
that way I'll have the physical text. So when I'm like, oh, I want to remember this passage in it, I can go to it and I don't have to flip through my phone, be like, what chapter was that in? You can absorb information in a different way. So it's definitely different. We'll give you that technicality.
So I'll give you 2 books. Well, actually, yeah, 2 books. There's Meditations
fiction.
by Marcus Aurelius, and then there's that I've listened to and then read. And I would honestly say listening to is way better because then I have a guy I don't have to try to figure out the stupid structure that these dumb Romans did. And the other one is The Art of War by Sun Tzu. And they read it with the Peter Baelish guy. And I'd much rather listen to Peter Baelish.
I actually read Art of War though.
I read it physically first, and then I did the audiobook. Because physically, it's just not efficient for me. What am I going to do in a car?
Well, you're just basically saying that you just have such a bad reading level.
But I
that
read
you need
just
to
as
listen.
fast. I'm saying it took me 10 hours each. I actually slow it down on Audible because some of them talk super fast when they do the conversations between people. I don't like that.
Yeah.
Because usually they have 2 different narrators for each person, and that's like, okay, now I can tell who's who. But when you have the same dude saying it, I'm like, oh, hold up. So that I'll give you that for the book. But I'd say most books these days are made with the audiobook in mind. And I know that from every newer book I've listened to.
It's not fucking.
Is like they have the author there, and they have him or somebody else narrate it, because sometimes the author has a stupid voice.
I think we've come to the end on this one. Just say you're listening to it, and you won't piss off guys like
You're
Coop
consuming it.
who are like, I'm not listening to a podcast. I have an authority complex, and I have to read this book.
Here's the deal.
It's because reading's hard for him. So
Hey, I'm not going to get books. I'm sticking to scrolls.
I don't like to read that much because
that's Coop.
Because I get distracted more when I read. I feel like
that's because you.
No, but if I'm sitting and I'm reading, it's like, well, what am I going to do with my hands?
It's more impressive. Because you have to sit down and physically. You have to be sitting down physically.
But if you're reading a book without
which is way
charts
more
and
impressive.
shit.
I can sit down on the couch and listen to a fucking book while I'm working. That's cheating. If you're reading a book, you need to sacrifice the actual time of day to sit down and read a book.
But why is sacrifice so admirable?
Because it's more impressive to read a book.
I'd say it's more impressive to get a full work day and have the same amount of point in the book at the end of the day, because you only got one life.
Yeah.
Agreed.
So if you're driving,
that's why I'm doing it.
I guess this is
you
just
gotta do something in that hour. And I'm done with podcasts now. Besides this one, it's just I've realized 90% of it is just filler.
Shut the fuck up, dude.
This is not. This has been a full conversation.
Hey, I would like to say we critique a lot of stuff really well on this podcast.
This podcast might go better without Aaron.
If we can critique podcasts on this podcast,
Aaron's
I think that's pretty meta. That's pretty meta right there. If we critique,
Aaron, have you seen a book?
Aaron, does this podcast suck?
He's silent. He's silent, and he's never gonna fucking comment because he doesn't listen and support the fucking podcast. Anyway,
he reads books in 6-second increments.
I think this podcast does suck because we're switching